I grew up in a small mountain town surrounded by dense forests. My friends and I loved hiking, but there was one place we always avoided, an overgrown trail deep in the woods. The locals called it the Hollow. They said people who wandered too far in never came back. As kids, we always thought the stories were just small-town legends, something to scare newcomers or keep kids from getting lost in the woods. But there was always a strange, eerie silence about that area. Birds never chirped there. Wind never rustled the leaves. It was just still. One summer evening, my best friend Liam and I decided to test the legend. It was that golden hour just before dusk, the sky bleeding orange and purple as we grabbed our flashlights and set off toward the hollow. We joked about how stupid it was, how we'd be back home in an hour laughing about how haunted the place was. The moment we stepped past the first row of trees, the air changed. It was thicker, damp, like the forest itself was breathing. The deeper we walked, the quieter it got. Not just quiet, dead silent. Then we heard it, a whistle, low, slow, and deliberate. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was a melody to it, almost playful, like someone whistling a tune. Liam laughed nervously. Someone's messing with us. I nodded, trying to ignore the sudden tightness in my chest. We kept walking. The whistle stopped. Then it started again, but this time behind us. We froze. I turned, shining my flashlight into the trees, expecting to see someone hiding behind a trunk, maybe some local trying to scare us. But there was nothing, just endless rows of trees, stretching into the darkness. Then the whistle moved, first to the left, then to the right. It was circling us. Liam grabbed my arm. "Let's go." We turned back the way we came, moving fast, but the path didn't look the same. The trees seemed closer together, the trail narrower. It felt like the forest was closing in around us. That's when we saw it. Footprints, but not ours. They were ahead of us, fresh in the dirt, leading deeper into the woods. They were spaced strangely, like whoever made them had taken long, unnatural steps, and they weren't alone. There were two sets. No, 3, 4. Then, we heard a snap, a branch breaking, directly behind us. We spun around, flashlights shaking. That's when I saw the first glimpse of it, something peeking from behind a tree. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was tall, impossibly thin, with hollow black eyes. Its mouth wasn't moving, but the whistling didn't stop. Liam yanked my arm, and we ran. The whistling grew louder, closer. It wasn't behind us anymore. It was above us. The trees seemed taller, darker, like shadows stretching out to grab us. Then, suddenly, the whistling stopped. We reached the edge of the woods, panting, barely able to breathe. We didn't stop running until we were halfway down the road leading home. Only then did we dare to look back. The trail was empty. But just before I turned away, I saw something. A tall, thin figure standing at the entrance of the hollow, perfectly still, watching. And even though its mouth wasn't moving, I could still hear the whistle. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing at the edge of my bed, waiting. A week later, Liam called me in the middle of the night. His voice was shaking. "It's outside my window." I rushed to his house. We searched the yard, the street. Nothing. But when I walked home, I heard it again. Low, slow, and deliberate. That same eerie whistle, drifting from the woods. We never went back to the hollow. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is silent, I still hear that whistle outside my window. And I know it's waiting. A few years ago, I worked as a park ranger in a remote national park. It was a peaceful job until I learned about the disappearances. 3 campers had gone missing in the same area over the last decade. No remains, no evidence, just gone. I had heard the rumors from the other rangers. The forest swallows people, they'd say in hushed voices. Some believed the terrain was too dangerous. that people got lost and never found their way out. Others, the older rangers, had different stories. One's about something lurking in the deep woods, something watching. I never believed it, until that night. I was assigned an overnight patrol near Ridgewood Campground, one of the last places the most recent missing campers were seen. The air was crisp, a light fog rolling in as I set up near my station, a small, rusted lookout cabin deep in the trees. Around 1:45 a.m., my radio crackled to life. "Hello? Help? Us?" The voice was faint, distorted, like it was coming from deep inside the static. My heart jumped. I grabbed the radio and responded. "This is Ranger Carter. Who is this?" Over. Silence. Then, after a few long seconds, the voice returned, low, barely a whisper now. "We see you." A wave of cold washed over me. I looked around, shining my flashlight through the thickening fog. Nothing but trees. But then, the sound of footsteps. Not the quick, panicked kind of someone lost in the woods. No, these were slow, deliberate, heavy. I turned toward the sound, my pulse hammering in my ears. The beam of my flashlight cut through the mist, illuminating a row of trees, and something just beyond them. At first it looked like people, 3 of them, standing in the distance just outside the reach of my light. I called out, "Hello? Are you lost?" No answer. They stood perfectly still, their silhouettes barely visible through the fog. I took a step closer, the crunch of leaves loud beneath my boots. Then, in perfect unison, they all turned and walked deeper into the forest. No hesitation, no fumbling in the dark, just silent, synchronized movements, disappearing into the mist. A sickening feeling settled in my stomach. I hesitated for only a moment before following. My job was to help lost hikers, after all. As I moved deeper into the woods, the fog grew thicker. The temperature dropped. The trees seemed closer together, the forest darker than it should have been. Then I found it. A campsite. Torn tents, scattered belongings, a burnt-out fire pit, as if someone had been here not long ago. And in the middle of it all, a backpack. It looked old, weathered by time. I knelt down, brushing off the dirt, and my breath caught in my throat. There was an ID card inside. The name was Michael Renshaw. I knew that name. He was one of the campers who vanished here 15 years ago. A cold shiver ran down my spine as the forest around me felt wrong. The air was too still, the trees too silent. I stood up, gripping my flashlight tighter, and then a whisper right behind me. "Help us." I spun around, my flashlight shaking. There they were, the 3 figures, standing just feet away. My light finally revealed them, and I wished it hadn't. Their faces were wrong, stretched, hollow, mouths open too wide, eyes black pits reflecting my own flashlight back at me. And the worst part? They were smiling. I took a step back, my breath caught in my throat. That's when they moved. Not like normal people. Their bodies twitched, contorted, jerked in unnatural angles as they rushed toward me without a sound. I ran. I didn't stop, didn't turn back, didn't breathe until I reached my patrol truck at the edge of the woods. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and gripped the steering wheel, my hands shaking. And then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Something was knocking on the window. I refused to look. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the wheel, my heart hammering in my chest. By the time I finally looked up, the sun was rising, and the forest was empty. I left my job shortly after. I told my supervisor I was done, no explanation. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I think about them, the vanishing campers. And I wonder if they were still out there, or if they were something else entirely. I've been an avid camper for most of my life. I love the solitude of the forest, the way it makes the world feel still. But after what happened last summer, I don't think I'll ever camp alone again. It was late August, and I had set up camp deep in the mountains, far from any hiking trails, far from civilization. No cell service, no roads. Just me, my tent, and miles of untouched wilderness. I had done this before, many times actually. I loved disconnecting from the world, spending my nights by a fire, and waking up to nothing but the sounds of nature. The first night was peaceful. I made a fire, cooked some food, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. But on the second night, I woke up, not to a noise, to the absence of noise. The crickets had stopped, the wind had died, no rustling of leaves, no distant hoot of an owl, just silence, a silence so thick it felt unnatural. Then I heard footsteps, not the scampering of a raccoon or the heavy steps of a deer. These were slow, deliberate, human. I held my breath, straining my ears. The steps were close, maybe 30 feet away. My hand tightened around the small hunting knife I always kept in my sleeping bag. I waited, listened. Then, after a long pause, another step. Closer. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped my tent just a crack, and shined the beam outside. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense trees around me. At first, there was nothing, just endless forest. Then, I saw him. A man, standing completely still, just beyond the tree line. His clothes were tattered, his skin unnaturally pale. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but I could see his eyes, wide open, unblinking, just staring. I felt a wave of cold wash over me. I whispered, "Hello?" No response, no movement. I should have packed up right then and there, but I didn't. Something about him. It was like my brain refused to fully comprehend what I was seeing. Then, he did something that froze my blood. He tilted his head, not like a normal person. It was too slow, too unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. Then, he took a single step forward. That was enough for me. I zipped my tent closed, grabbed my knife, and sat there, barely breathing. For a long time, there was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, just silence. Eventually, exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. The first thing I noticed was that the crickets were back. The normal sounds of the forest had returned. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Then, I unzipped my tent, and my stomach dropped. There were footprints, leading from the tree line to my tent. They stopped just inches from where I had been sleeping. But the worst part? There were no footprints leading away. Whoever, or whatever, had been standing outside my tent had never walked away. It had just disappeared. I packed up my gear in record time, my hands shaking. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just stuffed everything into my bag and started hiking back to my truck. The whole time, I felt watched. The trees seemed closer together, the forest too quiet again. Then, halfway back, I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being followed. I stopped, turned around, nothing, just trees. I picked up my pace, heart hammering in my chest. Then, just as I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw something ahead, a tree. At first it looked normal, until I got closer. There was something carved into the bark. Words, 4 words, scratched deep into the wood, like they had been made with something sharp. See you next time. I ran the rest of the way to my truck. I don't go camping alone anymore, and sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the next time.